Hello guys, so today we're going to be doing a 1UZ VVT-i from an LS400 98 to 2000. It's an adapted existing harness and this one's going to be manual, so there's no automatic gearbox wiring in there. So let's get into it. Right, so as discussed, it's going to be a 1UZ-FE VVT-i from an LS400 98 to 2000. It's an adapted harness, so obviously we've completely stripped the existing harness down, cleaned it, removed everything is no longer necessary, added in what's necessary, attached the fuse box, and sorted out the ECU with the ATEMU device and the immobiliser removal. So obviously this harness can technically be used in any vehicle you want. It is completely standalone and is not relevant to any vehicle. Right, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be carrying out a few things. First, we're going to go through the layout of the harness so the customer knows where everything goes and plugs in, obviously. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go through the plug on the fuse box that the customer needs to connect inside the vehicle. Not everything needs to be connected, but I'm going to go through all 9 wires, explain them in detail, and give you some tips and tricks along the way. Then what we're going to do is run into the actual testing, which is split into 2 sections. One with just the ignition on. We'll test a couple of things, and then what we actually do is fire the engine up, test more things, and that'll show you that everything's running perfectly and as it should be. Right, so before I start the layout, what I'm going to do is we've actually got some photos to show you guys what it looks like when we completely strip everything down, remove everything. So I'm going to cut through to those now. Back in a second and we'll go through the layout.
Break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game.
Right, so that's obviously what the process that we go through there. So what we're going to do now with the layout is we're going to start here at the ECU side. So on the ECU, you've got 6 plugs altogether. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and number 6 is the grey one in the corner over there. Okay, for our manual adapted harnesses, it's only these 2 plugs that are actually connected to the engine harness itself. So if you want to remove the harness while this is all mounted in the vehicle, just these 2 plugs need to come out. And then the section that pops out the harness there that goes to the fuse box is just that over there. So literally 1, 2, 3 plugs, boom, and you can pull the whole entire harness out the vehicle. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. These plugs have their own harness. So as you can see over there with my fingers holding there, that pops in, it goes around through there and plugs into the fuse box over there. Okay, so all ECU plugs and the fuse box plugs are completely unique. You can't put the wrong one in the wrong place. They just won't fit. So you don't need to worry about that. You can never get it wrong. It all just plugs straight in. Right, so following on from there, we're going to end up at our grommet. So this is the grommet that's going to go into your firewall. And as you can imagine, you're going to drill a nice hole there. It's rubber, it's going to squeeze in there, means no water is going to get inside the vehicle. Obviously, we keep going up along here with the rubber section. Then we end up at the piece of plastic at the back. So this is just a large casing that goes over here. It does bolt down to the engine and it keeps everything in check at the back here. Now, there are 3 mounting positions. You've got that one over there. You've got that one over there. And you've got that one over there. Now, obviously, some of you have noticed I don't have that one or that one bolted down, and that's because this is an LS400 engine, right? So the water bridges are slightly different. The way the water pipes come out are slightly different. So again, if you're fitting a 1UZ onto a 3UZ, these are the kind of things you're going to come across. Obviously on a 1UZ, you're going to have the mounting holes for that, and for that, and for that. So that's going to be bolted down really nice and tight, and it's not going to go anywhere. Right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start from here. We're going to work all the way down to the crank sensor there. Then I'm going to come back. We're going to focus on this little section at the back here where some harnesses pop out. Then we're going to go around the other side and go around there. All right, so at the back here, it just pops up. Harness goes along there into the next piece of plastic. So this one bolts to the inlet manifold, and you've got a bolt there and you've got a bolt there. So really super nice and easy. Just the 2 bolts, keeps all in place. Then first little section that pops out is going to be over here, and that's going to go to injector 7 and coil 7. So if you were unaware, always looking at the engine from the back is how you determine which bank and which cylinder it is. So if you're sitting inside the vehicle, this is the left-hand side, that is the right-hand side. We have cylinder 1, 3, 5, and 7, and cylinder 2, 4, 6, and 8 over there. Okay, I'll go through it all as we go along, but just to give you guys a heads up at the beginning. Right, so moving along, we've got the next breakout over here, and that's going to go to injector 5 and coil 5. Move slightly along there, and we're going to get to the next breakout section, which is going to be injector 3 and coil 3. Now also we have the cam sensor for the left bank. So on the 1UZ and the 3UZ VVT-Is, there are 3 cam sensors. You've got one at the front, which obviously determines engine position. You've then got this one on the left bank and another one on the right bank, and that is measuring the inlet cam, because on these engines, it's only the inlet cam that is variable VVT-i controlled. So obviously the ECU needs to know if it commands 35 degrees of advance on the cams. That's measuring it to make sure that it's carrying out the command as requested. Okay. Right, so moving from there, we're going to go to the front of the box, of the plastic sort of container. Then you're going to have one cable that pops out over there, and that's going to go to your noise filter. So that should be bolted onto your inlet manifold already. You're just going to plug that straight in. Now what you'll notice, guys, is there used to be another plug, or the customer will notice there used to be another plug that pops out here. You're going to see there's like a little vacuum solenoid valve there. Has a little vacuum pipe that runs to the front here, and usually a vacuum pipe that's either missing or it's been chopped off. So that's now completely removed. It's no longer necessary for the system. So you can remove that vacuum solenoid valve, block up the hole on the front here, and away you go. You'll also notice that there used to be one of those very old school diagnostic plugs on here. Well, pretty much on the 1UZ VVT-i, they are next to completely useless. So we have removed all of that. And so you have the OBD2 plug that comes as part of the fuse box. Right. Moving along from there, it's going to come to about here, and it's going to break out again at the front, and that's going to go to injector 1, coil 1. It's also going to go to the oil control valve for the left bank. Moving along about another 1.5 inches, it's going to break out again, and it's going to go across here over to your accelerator pedal position sensor. So remember, although you've got a cable, it is drive-by-wire. If I can find the link to the video that explains these in detail, I will put it up there. It's either myself or Calvin Glover Carchi that have done one. All right. It's also going to break out, and it's going to go to your TPS plug. Now you're saying that's not a TPS. Well, you're right. There's the TPS down in there. There's another connector down in there. And if you follow my finger, you'll see there's just a little sub harness that pops in over there. As you can imagine, trying to get that plug out when you want to remove the engine harness is going to be nigh on impossible. So Toyota made it nice and easy, and they shoved this plug on the top there. So that's where your TPS plug is. It's going to carry on along there, and then it's going to end up at your drive-by-wire plug. So that contains your drive-by-wire motor and your clutch wires. Here's the actual stepper motor for the drive-by-wire there, and you'll often hear that humming when you put the ignition on. So that little humming noise, perfectly normal. It's the stepper motor inside there that's doing it. The other section that's going to break out there is going to be the cam sensor for the front. So as I said, this one is measuring engine position in relation to your timing belt. Obviously, the inlet cams can advance and retard as they want, but this one has a set position. So this one it's using to obviously fully sequential fire everything, so the injectors and the spark plugs as well. Okay, moving along down here. Now what you're going to notice is you've got 2 mounting holes there, and if you look, it's conveniently exactly the same shape as the harness, so you can use those clips to hold it nice and tight and out the way over there. Once we get around there, it's going to break out into 2 sections. So you can see this little tiny heat shrink section there. That's your oil pressure switch. We've added that in because on the 1UZ it didn't come on the actual main engine harness, and obviously we incorporate everything into one. So there's a little hole here. Remember, your aircon pump is usually here, so I'm going to show you what it looks like behind it so you can get a visualization. So the taped up section is your crank sensor. So they run through there. But what you'll notice is this is an LS430 engine, so the oil filter's in the wrong location. On your LS400, it's more towards the back here. And most importantly, your oil pressure switch, which is the same part, is facing that direction. So the plug's actually pointing towards the rear of the vehicle. So options are, you either take that little thin one, run it across the back there, boom, plug it in there, or you can run it through the hole there, bring it on the back of the aircon pump, run it in there, okay? And then obviously the taped up section just runs straight through that hole, straight through there, out there, and pops out at your crank sensor over there, okay? The connector is perfectly viable to fit right through this hole, so that's not a problem. But if you do have your aircon pump, you're going to have to get a little creative over there and try and feel for the connector as you push it down through there, and it makes its way down through there. But it's nice to see what it looks like so you can get an idea when you are trying to fit it in. Okay, so that's that layout section over there. So hopefully that's relatively straightforward. Obviously it makes a U shape, so it's kind of easy. When you get the engine on, you just drop it on the top, bolt this down, bolt that down, and then you start knocking yourself out, just connecting everything as you go along. Okay. Right, so coming back to over here, and as I said, we're going to look at this section over here. There's only 2 sections that pop out over here. First one is your earth strap, right? I have an M6 bolt in here. You're not going to have an M6 bolt in here because that's what the 3UZs use. M8 bolt slightly lower. That's what the 1UZ VVT-Is use. And you've actually got another threaded hole in there, but again, not used, so you won't have a bolt in there. Obviously, I've just put that bolt in there. All right. Next up is your lambda sensor. So that pops down and goes along there. Now then, there is a metal shield that goes between the exhaust and the engine block, and your lambda sensor plug is designed to go through that. Now, please do put that back on, because if that plug vibrates out and touches on the exhaust, it's going to melt in approximately 0.5 seconds. And obviously then you're going to have to then completely change it and get it new. And not to mention the fact that there are 12 volts in there. So if it shorts out, you're going to basically deactivate all your sensor 12 volts. That includes your MAF and your other lambda sensor. So if you do get a code suddenly for both lambda sensors and MAF sensor and you think, how can they be possible? Have a look down there. Maybe that's melted across there if you haven't put the metal shield on there. Okay. Right, to show you what it looks like underneath there. So you can see there's your lambda sensor there. There's the actual connector itself. Okay. And that just pops in there. Right, while we're here, I'm going to pop over to the actual sub harness, or what I call the sub harness, that goes into under the inlet manifold. It goes to the two NOx sensors and the starter solenoid. Okay, also has the main power for your starter, so you can see that over there. And in this case, it's running straight to your battery. Okay. Also coming out of there is the plug that goes and joins the engine harness to the harness that goes underneath there. So that just plugs straight in there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you what it looks like underneath there. And what you'll notice is that we've labeled knock 1 and knock 2. Okay, so knock 1, left bank, knock 2, right bank, cylinder 1, cylinder 2. That's where you get the 1 and 2 from. Okay, so that's all relatively straightforward. Okay, so that's that section over there. Now, you'll notice your main power cable is very long. Okay, feel free to chop it to whatever length is applicable for you. They were actually designed originally to run all the way down along the bottom of the block and up to where the battery sat, which was basically right here on an LS400. Okay, so if your battery's in the back there, just chop it, make it shorter, put your own terminal on, and then connect it directly to the positive of your battery. Right, so that's that section there. So I'm going to pop around the other side and let's start going through all of those. Right, so coming to the back of the plastic here. Before we go all the way, you'll see there's one other earth that pops out over there. And again, it goes to the M8 hole, not the M6. You won't even have a bolt in there, so that should be fine. While I'm here, these earths, this one and the one on the other bank, are all the earths on your engine for your entire engine harness. Okay. Now, aluminium has a tendency to rust. So before you bolt these all back on again, do yourself a favor, get some emery cloth, just rub it down before you put them on. Make sure you got a nice clean connection. Okay. What you can also do, which I normally advise, is either from here, so you can use the M6 hole there, or you can use the other M8 hole or the M6 hole over there, and attach a little earth strap from there to the firewall. You can do both cylinder heads, or you can do one. It really doesn't matter which one you do. And then the other earth, apart from the main one that goes to your block. So remember, you've got the main earth going straight to your block, and that's what your starter uses to earth out. But then you can also take one to the firewall, and then Toyota, Lexus originally also put an earth strap from one of the gearbox bolts to the chassis leg as well. So if you put those earths on, you should be absolutely fine. All right. So moving along here, we're going to get to the end over there, and then we're going to break out for injector 8 and coil 8. Relatively straightforward. Move along here, and we're going to break out the 3 sections: injector 6, coil 6, and your ACIS plug. Okay, so this runs underneath the intake and goes all the way to the front to the vacuum solenoid valve for the ACIS. Okay, now, because you've got to pull the intake off to get that other harness section in, this is a good time to test your vacuum solenoid valve for your ACIS. Right, so easy way to test it is, if you look at this plug, you've got a thick white one and you've got a blue with a white tracer. All right, thick white is 12 volts, blue with a white tracer is ground. Follow it through to this side and just have this plug in your hand. Get yourself a battery or a test light where you can force power down, and then basically supply power and ground to the correct wires on that one, and you should hear your vacuum solenoid click. If you don't, now's a good time to change, because you don't want to have to pull this all off again when you start it up and you realize that your ACIS valve hasn't closed like that. Okay, super important. You lose a hell of a lot of power low down, so please do check that while it's out. Just makes your life a whole lot easier. Okay, so then the harness is going to carry on from there. We're going to break out over here, and that's going to go to your cam for your right inlet cam, or cam sensor for your right inlet cam, injector 4 and ignition coil 4. Moving along again, it's going to pop out over here, and it's going to go to injector 2 and coil 2. It's also going to go to your coolant temperature sensor, so you see that over there. Now, you can see I've got a coolant temp sensor in there, but you're going to have a bolt. Now, what we've done is we've given you a wire with plenty of length on there for you guys. So if you need to fit a coolant temp sensor to run a gauge inside your vehicle, that is the place to do it. That's the place Toyota did it. Now, this is actually a 1UZ non-VVT-i. gauge temp sensor, and it literally bolts directly straight in. But obviously the caveat is that sensor might not be any good for your particular gauge. If your gauge came with a sensor, then by all means, whack it in there. If you need to tap the hole, obviously that'd be a good time to take off the water bridge and replace the gaskets underneath at the same time. Okay, right. Next up is also your oil control valve for the right bank. So that plugs directly in there. And then lastly, you've got your mass airflow sensor. So that is over there, all right? Make sure you've got this mass airflow sensor. Okay, it looks like a bullet in there. This is the correct one for a 1UZ-FE VVT-i from an LS400 98-2000 that applies to both European and US models, okay? Just be careful because there are the little tiny masts that come on the 3UZs, and obviously if you have a Japanese model like the Crown UZS175 or 171, either one of those, they had the little tiny ones. Now they are completely different wiring. If you plug this plug into one of those tiny maps, all you're going to do is blow up the intake air temperature sensor and vice versa. Okay, so if you plug this into a small one, you're going to damage that one, and if you plug like a 3UZ harness into one of these, you're going to damage the sensor as soon as you turn the ignition on. Okay, all right, then the harness is going to carry on down over here. We're going to get to the other section that we've added in, and that is your alternator plug. So you can see it's out there. We have labeled it for you. Okay, now again, this wasn't included in the main engine harness on a 1UZ VVT-i, hence why we added in to make sure you have one engine harness to control everything. And then it runs down along there, and then it ends up at the other lambda sensor plug. Okay, right, so again, we're only using the main lambda sensors. We're not using the secondary lambda sensors. Okay, obviously we'll go through all of that when we do part of the testing, but yeah, the ones after the cats are no longer needed. They're not wide in. Fine, don't worry about it. Okay, so that is the entire layout. So things you need to remember that's not part of the harness, okay, before I miss it, is your alternator. You see that's going to bolt directly on there. Okay, so what Toyota normally did on pretty much all their vehicles that I've come across is that main positive for the alternator would go into some sort of fuse box where it'd be fused either with like 100, 120 or 140 amp fuse, okay? So I do recommend to do that. It's a good safety feature. If anything were to happen to this cable and it's shorted out for whatever reason, that fuse is going to pop and you want it as close to your battery as is humanly possible. The only ones that they don't fuse is basically the starter cable. Okay, that just runs straight from the starter straight to the battery. Okay, obviously they pull a lot of amperage, so to get a decent fuse that you don't have to keep replacing every 5 seconds, yeah. But alternator, definitely fuse for your own safety. And then just to recap the earths, you want obviously your main earth to go to the block. Doesn't really matter where you mount it. Originally they were mounted onto using one of the bolts for the engine mounts. So again, that's perfectly acceptable. There are other bolts along there that you can use as well, or bolt holes I should say you can use. Okay, so you want your main thick earth, same size or basically the same size as your starter cable. That's going to run straight to your block. Then you're going to take earth from the cylinder head to the firewall, and then you're going to take another earth strap from the gearbox bolts to the cylinder, and that should cover you. You should be absolutely fine with that. Now, I don't underestimate the fact that these love earths. I've had so many problems with earthing with these things that, as far as I'm concerned, you can't put too many earths. Okay. All right. So that's the entire layout of the harness where everything goes. So that should be relatively straightforward for you. Next up, we're going to move over to the plugs. Now, there are technically 2 plugs. One's kind of irrelevant because it's literally just got the OBD2 connector in. So that's absolutely fine. Nothing really for you to do there, just to plug in when you want to do diagnostics. Right. The other plug is a 9-pin connector. So that's relatively straightforward. And we're going to go through each one of those wires now. I'm going to tell you what color they are, and I'm going to tell you exactly how to connect them. So starting with number 1, that's a thick red 14 gauge wire. Now, I've labeled this as permanent 12 volt supply. Okay, now I do mean permanent 12 volt supply. So why do I say permanent? The ECU needs a permanent 12 volt supply to retain things like diagnostic codes, to retain things like long-term fuel trims, etc., etc. So if you connect this to an ignition 12 volt source, you're going to keep resetting the ECU every single time you turn the key off. Now you'd say, okay, but that doesn't really matter. Well, it does, because if you're trying to do diagnostics, okay, and you're trying to look at the codes that have been generated, all right, you're not going to be able to, because you start the car up, you get a check engine light, you then plug in your code reader, you turn the key off, back on again, boom, the code is completely gone, okay. Now, I like to do that because basically sometimes you can have a sensor that's starting to fail and it'll start to give you codes, okay? It may not be a fault right now, but you can check the codes every now and again and just see if there's anything that keeps popping up as an error, okay? You won't be able to do that if you don't have it permanently connected. You'll keep resetting the ECU, okay? Next up is going to be black with a yellow tracer. So you can see black with a yellow tracer on there. That's your start signal. That requires a 12 volts. We've obviously done that because most of the times you're either going to use an ignition barrel or a key barrel, or you're going to use a button. If you're going to use a button, you just supply the other side with the ignition 12 volts and take the other side to our black with a yellow tracer wire. Then you've got a start button. If you're going to use your key barrel, you're just going to look for the wire that gives 12 volts when you move to the start position, which is pretty standard across all the key barrels that I've pretty much come across. Okay, right, so that's that one over there. Number 3 is going to be yellow with a green. So you can see it's actually attached to our little device here. I've attached it so we can see the coolant temperature sensor on the gauge here. Okay, but that's the one that's connected to that little white wire that I showed you earlier over there. Okay, and next up is going to be gray, and this is a gray 16 gauge wire, and that's going to be the control for your fuel pump. Now the fuel pumps in this particular case are controlled via the ECU. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to put a link up for you guys. I've done a really nice video explaining how it works. Okay, it's going to answer some questions that you might come across there, so please, I do advise you, go look at it just so you know exactly what's going on there. But yeah, this is a 12 volts for a fuel pump. You can run it straight to the fuel pump and earth the fuel pump right where the fuel pump is at the back of the vehicle. Okay, if for whatever reason you have to do 2 fuel pumps or something or other, then you can use this to trigger a relay closer to the fuel pump, okay? And this will give out a 12 volts, so just bear that in mind if you're using that to trigger a relay closer to the fuel pump. Next up is going to be yellow with a red. So you can see my yellow with a red over there. I've got it connected to our cluster over here, and that's going to be check engine light. So we're going to be able to see the check engine light pop up over there. Now, most importantly, we do have a little LED inside your fuse box that is also a check engine light. So I do not require you guys to actually mount that check engine light into there. I put it in the fuse box for 2 reasons. 1, for diagnostics. Number 2, it's just if you guys want to get it started on the floor really quickly, at least when you put the ignition power on, you can see the check engine light come on and you know everything is fine and dandy. Okay. Next up is going to be yellow. So you can see my solid yellow wire over there. Okay. And that is going to be tacho signal. So that is coming from the ECU. It is a 4-cylinder signal, not an 8-cylinder signal. So if you are using an aftermarket tack or using your current vehicle's tack and you know it's a 6-cylinder, now you'll see in my case, I'm actually attaching it into here because this is going to be converting from a 4-cylinder to a 6-cylinder. So when we see the rev counter here come on, when we actually start it up, we're going to have a correct RPM reading just so you can see that's all working as it should do. All right. Next up is going to be black with a red tracer. So there he is over there. That is your ignition supply. So that's what's going to turn the whole system on. So again, if you're using a key barrel, it's what you're going to connect to your ignition supply. Now, tip. If you're using a key barrel, there are 3 positions: accessory, ignition, and start. Okay. Why is that important? Well, accessory provides 12 volts, but the second you turn the key to start, that feed disappears. Okay. If you connect that wire to accessory, what's going to basically happen is every time you go to crank the car, she will turn over because the starter circuit is a completely separate circuit. It doesn't care. But what's going to happen is you're going to shut the ECU down every time you do it. So if you are looking for an ignition source at the back of a key barrel, things to do: get your multimeter or test light, put the key to the ignition, find the 12 volt wire, turn the key to start, check if the 12 volt goes out. If it doesn't, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, you've got your ignition supply and you can connect it to that black with a red tracer wire. If it goes away, you find the accessory feed, move along, find the other wire that is the ignition. Next up is going to be this pink with a blue, and that is going to be our alternator light. So you see here, I've just connected it to an LED here, all right? And that gives out a ground signal, just so you are aware. And you can use that to run to your dash. You can use that to run to an LED. The one thing I will say that I've come across quite a few times is if you are using an older vehicle, and you have a dash and it's using an incandescent bulb, and more importantly, it doesn't have any built-in diodes inside the cluster to stop any type of backfeeding, you need to fit one. Okay, so you have 2 options. 1, you can fit a diode in line to stop backfeeding into the alternator. Number 2, you can just swap the bulb out for an LED bulb and it'll do exactly the same job because obviously an LED is a diode. Okay, so those are your 2 options there. All right. If you're not going to take it to there, but you're going to have like a little light on the dash, like a separate thing, then obviously just make sure that's LED, and then your problem is solved. Because remember, it gives out a ground, so you're supplying 12 volts to the other side. All right. Next up is going to be yellow with a black, and that is our oil pressure switch wire. So again, that's going to here because it's going to make our dash work. So we're going to see our red oil pressure light come on there when we turn the ignition on. So again, same as alternator light, it gives out an earth. No funny stuff, no diodes or anything like that, because that wire literally goes straight to your oil pressure switch and nowhere else. It doesn't go to the ECU, it doesn't go anywhere like that. So you don't have to make any worries about that at all. It's not going to backfeed into anything. So just straightforward, connected to your oil light for your dash, or if you're going to fit an LED, doing that one. All right, so that is the plug that you need to connect in the car. As you can see, it's really straightforward. In actual fact, you can get this whole engine started on the floor exactly like I'm doing by just literally connecting the red power, the gray fuel pump, put the ignition to 12 volts, use the black with the yellow wire to crank it over to start. That's literally all you need to connect and this whole thing will run. Okay, right, so what I'm gonna do now is gonna get this all set up so we can do the video for the actual testing. Again, it'll be in two sections, one with the ignition on, one with the engine actually running. So bear with me a second and I will be with you and let's get into the testing. Right, so guys, now we are back for the testing, which again is broken into two sections, one with just the ignition on, one with the engine running. First of all, I'm going to go through all the tests, explain them to you, then we'll jump in and we will get started. So with just the ignition on, what we're going to be doing first, checking for immobiliser removal. So I've actually connected the security light to our dash, so you can see we've got our security light flashing there. What we're looking for is when we put the ignition on, that light should go out permanently. That tells us that the immobiliser is removed. Obviously when we start it, that's the second test because it'll start and carry on running. Next up, check engine light. So we're going to make sure that the LED lights up on the fuse box, and we're going to make sure the check engine light lights up on the dash there, so we know the yellow with the red wire is correct and we know that the LED is correct as well. Alternator light, super simple. We're just going to make sure this little LED comes alive when we put the ignition on. Nice and straightforward. What you'll check as well is when we actually start the engine, you'll see, hopefully, that the voltmeter shoots right up as well, indicating that the alternator is actually charging the vehicle. Next up is oil pressure light. So we want to see the red oil pressure light appear on the dash. And again, once we start it up, we want to see it go out, so we know that that is working correctly. Next up is OBD2. So what I'm testing there is I've got my OBD2 machine plugged into there. We're going to check it all works. You can see I've already actually fired it up and you can see it says LS400 there, but we'll make sure we'll see all the live data and everything when we do that. Next up is going to be the fuel pump. So we're going to test the fuel pump via the machine because again, the ECU controls it. And I think I linked the video for you already there. So again, if you haven't watched that, you can go back and watch that and see how it works. Now, moving on to when the engine is running, we're going to do the starter circuit. So that basically means if I touch the black with the yellow wire to 12 volts, the engine cranks over and starts. Then I know everything is happy there. Then we're going to move over to the ACIS valve. So that's this little thing which should go down like that. What I'm going to do, if I haven't already, I'm going to put a link about the ACIS system so you can see exactly how it works and why it's so important. You do lose a lot of low down power. I can't emphasize that enough. So you need to make sure that does work. Next up is going to be drive-by-wire. So basically all I'm going to do there is I'm just going to rev it up. Nice and simple. And obviously, as I said, it is drive-by-wire. So as you can hear, there's no connection to the throttle until I get to the very end. And then you can hear the very, very last of the throttle is what controls that tiny opening of it in case the throttle shuts down because it's faulty. Right. Next up, we're going to go back to the machine and we're going to test the VVT-i solenoids. So what the machine is going to do is it's going to retard and advance the cams. It's going to sound like a really lumpy cammed engine, but that indicates that both oil control valves work and we do one and then the other. So we'll do bank 1 first and then we'll do bank 2. Next up is going to be TAC. So we're just going to come back to the cluster here, make sure that we're getting a reading coming through there. That's basically all we're looking for and we know that's working exactly as it should do. Then I'm going to go around and I'm going to unplug each injector one by one. You're going to hear the engine misfiring as I do that. So that indicates that every single cylinder is firing exactly as it should. Now, obviously, to do that single-handedly, I only have the injector slightly on. I've started it a couple of times and let it warmed up, so it hasn't had the odd occasional misfire. But if it does, more than likely just because one of these are a little bit loose, but I cannot take them all and unclip them all single-handedly. So they're just resting on the injector at the moment. Next up is going to be coolant temp. So we're just going to make sure we are seeing a coolant temp displayed on there, because remember our yellow with the green wire is connected to that, so it's translating via MPX to our little cluster there, so we know that's working exactly as it should do. Then lastly, we're going to go through codes, how to read codes, what codes mean, and I'll show you how to read the codes via the actual fuse box itself in case you don't have a device at the time you want to do it. So let's jump into the ignition side because that's relatively straightforward. So all I'm going to basically do, take my black with the red wire and I'm going to give it 12 volts. So remember, what we're looking for is that security light to stop flashing, and then we'll move on to the rest of the stuff. So first of all, let's turn it on. Right, so we can see now the security light has gone out completely, so we know the immobiliser is removed. We can see we've got the check engine light in the corner there. We can also see the LED in the fuse box is lit up. Super happy with that. Next up is going to be the oil pressure light. So you can see in the corner there, we've got our red oil pressure light on there. So that's absolutely great. So next up, we're going to move to the OBD2 machine, and I'm just going to go into data list over here so we can see some live data. And fingers crossed, we should see things like coolant temp and intake air temperature, etc. when it pops up. As you can see there, coolant temp 47 degrees, intake air temp 22, throttle at 16%. And you can hear that buzzing noise that I was speaking about. So that is completely normal on these 1UZ and the 3UZ engines, to be fair. They both have a stepper motor in there for that. Right, so let's move into testing the fuel pump now. So again, I'm using the ECU to trigger the fuel pump, which will trigger the relay inside the fuse box, which will activate the fuel pump, which I have down here. Right, so you can see over here it says fuel pump relay and fuel pump. If you'd watched my video, you'd understand why there are two of them there. Okay. So all I'm going to do is turn it on. I'm going to keep quiet now. And it's pretty loud, So again, you can see I'm completely controlling the fuel pump from the OBD2 machine, so you can see straight away that it's actually being controlled by the ECU. Right, so that is the fuel pump. All right, so that's relatively straightforward. So again, all the tests that we need to do with the engine off, just ignition on, are complete. What we're going to do now is we're going to jump into actually with the engine running. Okay, now I do have 47 degrees of coolant temp, so I'm happy that I can actually see that the needle has moved off of the rest there. So we know we've got some coolant temp there, enough to do it from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on my ear defenders, and then we're going to get started. So as I said, what we're going to do now is we're going to take the yellow with the black wire, we're going to touch it at 12 volts, it's going to start the engine. Then we're going to move over to the ACIS and the drive-by-wire, etc. But I'll go through them one by one. I will keep talking. Obviously it is very loud, only having just headers on, but usually the GoPro is quite good at picking up my voice and you can hear it loud and clear. So 3, 2, 1. So she runs for quite a while without the fuel pump on. Okay, right, so that's absolutely fine. So everything else is perfect now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get into codes. So first of all, this is the best tool that you're going to have. It's going to give you all the live data. It's going to be able to tell you everything in detail what you're looking for. So this is by far the best tool to do any type of diagnostics. But we do have the situation where we can use our fuse box to do diagnostics. It's not super accurate, but it gives you exactly sort of what the issue is, and at least somewhere you can start looking. Okay, so in terms of this, obviously that is relatively straightforward. I'm not going to go into great detail about that. You can get loads of these machines. You can get the Bluetooth ones. Not all of them work. Do bear that in mind. I've come across a few customers that have gone out and bought one of these, you know, £5, £25 Bluetooth ones, and it just does not pick up the ECU. So just please bear that in mind when you do that. But theoretically, you could take this whole setup to a Toyota dealership. They could plug into a TechStream, which is what I've got here, a Toyota Intelligent Tester. They'll obviously have a laptop, but they'll be able to plug in and see all the information that a normal Toyota dealer would be able to see. Right, so a few caveats. Number one, on the manual setups over here, there are going to be 5 codes in total, okay? The first 2 is going to be the secondary lambda sensors. Now what you'll notice, unlike our American cousins, we don't get a check engine light for the secondary lambda sensors. As you can clearly see, it's completely went out when it was running. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that here. Same with the Japanese ones. It's only our American cousins that need to worry about it because they are super strict because of all their draconian rules that they have. Right, so that is that. Next up is going to be 3 gearbox codes. Now it's SLU, SLT, and SLN, or P1755, P1760, and P1765. Now then, reason I don't get rid of the codes is A, it doesn't affect performance at all, which is the main reason. Number 2, we can get rid of the codes with resistors, but it's just an extra expense for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Your check engine light goes completely off, so you're going to pass any sort of, you know, MOT that you need to have the lights off over there, so that's going to be absolutely fine. And obviously the check engine light still functions exactly as it would. So if there is a genuine fault like a mass airflow sensor or coolant temp sensor or something like that, the check engine light will come on and stay on. Okay, so everything else that is actually relevant will cause check engine light to come on, so that's fine. So those are the 5 codes you're always going to have. You shouldn't have any more than that. Any more than that, and then you've got a genuine problem that you need to resolve, and the check engine light should come on straight away. Okay. Right, so OBD2 machine, really nice and simple, gives you all of those codes. Now we're going to move over to how you read the codes via the actual fuse box itself. Now, very important, on your fuse box you're going to see right there, it looks like there should be a fuse, but it's empty. It needs to remain that way. Okay, it is not a missing fuse. That is basically how you're going to read the diagnostic codes. Okay, so what you can do is, this 5 amp fuse is the STA fuse, so obviously it won't start, or it shouldn't start if you take that out, so it's not going to be the best solution. But if you've got just the ignition on and you want to read the codes, you're going to pull that fuse out like that, and you're going to bridge those 2 terminals. Now what we're looking for is the only codes that are going to come through this flash system are related to engine, not ECT, so electronic control transmission, sorry, using terms there. But basically we're going to get code 27 and we're going to get code 29. I'm going to count through with them so you can see exactly how to do it. And I'm going to show you that when it gets to 29, it's going to have a long pause and it's going to go back to 27. Okay, so let's do that now. So we've got 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 27. And it's going to be 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 29. See, long pause. We're going to go back to 27. So it's going to go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There you go. Okay. I'm not going to go through it again. You remove that, LED goes back on full time, and obviously this would have been flashing at the same time as well, because that is obviously a check engine light over there. Okay, so that's how you can read codes. In the welcome pack, that does include all of the stuff, the 9 Ys which we spoke about earlier, and all the written information that I've put down. You will also get 2 pages of codes. All right, so if you need to use that, then I've got a sheet for you that tells you exactly what each code means. So like 31 is mass airflow sensor, but the actual sensing of the airflow part. 24 I think is IAT, and so on. So those will all be listed down for you. So if you do get a check engine light on, you're stuck on the side of the road, you haven't got a machine, you just pull out your fuse box, boom, take the 5 amp fuse out, stick it in there, you'll be able to get your codes. Okay, now then, super important that you don't just leave that there. One reason, your check engine on, your dash is going to keep flashing at you the whole time, which is pretty annoying. But what it also does is it puts the engine into what they call the diagnostics mode. So it's not just flashing the lights, it also locks the timing at 10 degrees. Okay, so they've done that so you can check timing without physically removing all the covers. Timing light, Wrap the lead around the wires for the ignition coil 1 if your timing light's capable of picking up the pulse from these particular wires. My Sealy one does, so nice and straightforward. But if you come down here, you can see there we've got a mark on our crank pulley, and we've got 0, 5, 10 and 15 degrees. Okay, so if you bridge that terminal, obviously not with a 5 amp fuse because that's the starter one, but if you bridge that terminal, okay, and then you go and crank it and start the motor up, put your timing light on, you should see the timing sit at 10 degrees, absolutely stable 10 degrees, okay? Now then, as you can imagine, if you had to leave that connected and then try and drive the vehicle, you're gonna have 10 degrees of timing. It's gonna drive really badly. You're gonna have absolutely no power whatsoever, okay? Right, so bear in mind, when you're doing diagnostics, it's absolutely fine to do it, but the second you wanna go and drive it or something like that, please take that out. So the only reason you should have that bridged is to check codes via the check engine light or check the timing. Once you've done that, pull it out. You can use a paper clip obviously or whatever you need, but pull it out and make sure it doesn't live in there, okay? It sounds weird, but I've come across it before where guys just do that because they haven't connected the check engine light. They just leave the fuse box, they go boom, and they go, okay, cool, we'll go drive it. And then it drives like an absolute bag of nails, okay? Right, so that is everything. I've tested everything. I know that the engine runs absolutely smoothly, so hopefully the customer is going to have no problems at all. Drop the harness on, clip everything in, bolt it all down, connect his wires to the 9-pin plug, fire it all up, and off he goes. But again, thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them down below. I try and get to the comments as often as I can. Obviously, if you want pricing on stuff like this, again, just give us a shout on our Facebook page through the Messenger app there, and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. But thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.